Hello and welcome for another episode of Wise Women Wednesdays. I am Jennifer Regular as Soul-Centered Empowerment Coach at Lighting the Path and also your host here at Wise Women Wednesdays. I am happy to have my special guest as Tecca Thompson today, joining in from Columbus, Ohio. Welcome, Tecca.
Hello, how are you? Thank you so much for having me. I'm so
it's
excited.
such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure. So I know you a little bit, but the audience doesn't yet. So let me just tell them a little bit about you. Tecca Thompson is a self-care facilitator who creates spaces of rest, healing, and transformation. She's also a storyteller and community builder. Tecca is a certified breath zone breath coach and yoga nidra guide. I love yoga nidra. Tecca Thompson has had advanced training in somatic stress release and gentle somatic movement. Today, she's going to share a season of rest. Why do women of color need to rest? Tecca, again, I'm so glad that you're here, and I'd love to hear about rest, because that's not something that people really tend to value anymore. We yearn for it. We want it, but how much do we really take the time to create space for that rest and digest, to be able to just allow ourselves to surrender and relax and settle into the present moment, into our bodies? And women of color, perhaps that's in a different sense, that you're feeling that that's especially important. So I'd love to hear how this became your passion and how you came to find a place of rest, because I know probably your journey hasn't always been a linear one, because none of ours are. So I'd love to hear how all this came about for you.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for the space to share my story and share my perspective on why I feel women of color in particular really need to center rest in their lives. And you're absolutely right. It's a societal or a cultural expectation that we just work, and that rest is kind of like luxury, like a luxury, like I work so hard and I get to rest, or like we have to earn rest, but rest and sleeping are required for our bodies to function properly. And having proper rest, also having a practice of rest also helps us to access our creativity and our spirituality and some things that we don't think about on a different level. We can always be creative and we can always be connected spiritually, but when you're centering rest, it opens up almost like a portal to a different level of creativity and a different level of connection spiritually, and also with nature and all these different aspects that, because we're not resting enough, we're speeding by the opportunity for these beautiful connections. And we don't oftentimes have time to connect with each other because we're so busy working. But for me personally, I'm going to share a little bit about my business, which is Sacred Healing Spaces, and how that all came about. During the beginning of the pandemic, my body became incredibly dysregulated for lots of reasons. It was the pandemic and the social and racial unrest that was happening here in America. And in particular, I am immunocompromised, and I have been ever since I was 10 years old because of an accident. But I never looked at it as a disability until COVID came. All of a sudden, I'm at higher risk for having serious complications. And before, my condition always was kind of like, it made me feel stronger. Like I have this thing wrong with me, but I can do what everyone else could. So that kind of began to wear on me. And also the fact that people of color were being impacted disparately by this COVID as well. So you have that. And then the videotape of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery was released. And Ahmaud Arbery was a young man who was jogging in a neighborhood in Texas, and three people decided that he must have committed a crime, and they chased him down and they murdered him. And so when that videotape was released, I didn't watch the video because I don't believe in watching violence on Black and brown bodies being replayed over social media or video, because it desensitizes our system to violence on Black and brown bodies. If you keep seeing it over and over again, you kind of just, so I don't particularly watch it, but I knew something was going on that day. People were acting strange and hear it on the news, and I still have not watched the video. But what happened was my son, who of course is a young Black man, almost the same age as Ahmaud Arbery was an avid jogger. He was jogging every day because the gyms were closed. And it just did something to me where I became so dysregulated, I wasn't able to hold anything. Like I couldn't function almost. And everything in me that day wanted to call my son and say, can you please not jog tomorrow? But I was not even able to pick up the phone and call my son.
Oh, wow.
I just, so I crawled into bed, and the anxiety was just like I've never had before. So I had the anxiety of this unknown virus that was out, and being locked in the house. And then this, it felt like everything that I ever held for all the people in my life, I dropped it and I wasn't able to hold it. The only thing I could do was crawl into bed. And so I did a couple of things. After a while, I found a listening community through sidewalktalk.org. And they were doing a series on racism. And I decided that, hey, I wanted to try and show up. And I didn't realize how powerful listening could be. Wow. Sitting in a community of, people, and it didn't really matter what we were talking about. It was just the act of connecting with another human. And I found that it wasn't that I was being witnessed. It was when I sat quietly and leaned in and listened to someone else. There's something, I now know that the vagus nerve runs through all of the middle ear, the eyes, and the nose. And so there's a sense of co-regulation that we're wired to, connect in that way. Back then, I didn't know. I thought it was voodoo. I'm like, what is this? I feel incredibly calm. What is happening? So that got me started on my way. And then I just started to rest. Whenever I couldn't hold anything, when I couldn't think or process, I would go back to bed. I would nap. I just began to honor my body. So if my body said, nope, not today, and it didn't matter if work started at 8, if I clocked in at 8:15 and I began to feel heaviness or tiredness, I would clock out and I would go rest. So I just began to center rest. And so it was a progression. Initially, I was resting for survival. I had to lay my body down, right? And then after a while, I started to feel better, began to rest for my health. Like I was on the bottom. I began to rest because it was replenishing me, right? Mm-hmm. And it was healthy for me to rest in that way. And then I moved from resting for my health to resting because it was pleasurable. It feels good. It feels really good to lay down in the middle of the day and take a nap, right?
Yeah.
And so I rested because rest is pleasurable. If we allow ourselves the pleasure, I mean, like if you think about it, what is more yummy than on an afternoon when you lay down and you're tired and you just kind of softly drift off into a nap, and there's no pressure, there's no to-do list, and you just kind of drift off in this beautiful nap and you wake up feeling refreshed, right? that's beautiful, right? It just feels good to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the thing, when quite often I hear people experiencing the opposite, that when they lay down, they feel so much pressure and they have that to-do list running through and they can't seem to get really settled, even though they're lying down and resting. They can't seem to calm their mind and emotions enough to actually feel like they're resting.
Mhm.
And I love the perspective that you mentioned earlier too, about, not having rest as a survival mode where we just need to crash and just do nothing for a while and just, zone out and, have some snacks and watch Netflix or, something like that, but rather thinking of rest as creating the space and conditions to be able to allow your body to regulate again, to self-regulate, to come back into your own natural rhythms. And also that it opens up a whole portal, a whole different level of experiencing life in current reality from a different lens, a different space, a different energy that's brought into that. How is it that you call it a season of rest?
Well, so finally, the last part of this season, so I went from survival to health to pleasure to thriving.
Ah,
And in that thriving space of rest is where I really discovered and experienced that if I rest, what opens up to me, right? What really opens up to me, because I would begin to rest and I would wake up and I could write an entire curriculum program, like just write it out. It would just flow. And it became really present to me. And even now, even though that was a while back, like even now, that there are times when I lay down to rest that it is functional. And I can feel that. I've pushed myself too far and there's a shutting down, right? And I'm just resting to repair the body. But there's also a time when I can completely feel that I'm resting to make connection with nature, to make connections with my creativity, my spirituality. I feel it. And when I wake up, I feel enlightened, right? And so it, just like yoga or meditation, rest becomes a practice. And so I say season because I went through like a winter, a winter, a spring, and a fall, and a summer, just like those 4 phases. And so it was my season of rest. And I walked out of that season and founded my business, Sacred Healing Spaces. The sacred space is the space for rest. And also, I started somatics at the same time. And so, a space to whatever your sacred practice is, just creating that space, whether it be rest, somatics, yoga, breath work. Those spaces are sacred because they allow us to connect to our body's wisdom and also to our spirituality and to the earth.
making it sacred. Yes. Oh, I love that. And what kind of effect has this had on your son?
Well, my son was in a sense very not as dysregulated as me. So it's like I was not able to have these conversations with my son because it took him over the edge.
Oh.
And so like for a long time, I wasn't able to tell him how it impacted me. So I held it in because whenever we would start talking about the social and racial unrest that was happening in America, it would activate his nervous system, right? And so I really just kind of kept it to myself. But I do remember, and this is how racism lives in our bodies. After all of that resting and time spent, healing myself, my daughter, I have a daughter, my kids are 16 months apart, and they're in their 20s. And my daughter called me one day and she said, "Mom, I'm on my way to New York. I'm halfway there." And I'm like, "What? Like, did you not want to tell me that you were going to jump on the highway and head out to New York. I think it's like 8 or 9 hours. And, and so we just kind of laughed about it because she goes to New York quite frequently. But this particular time, I had no idea she was getting on the highway and going. And we laughed about it, right? And then about 5 minutes later, my son called and he said, Mom, I'm going to get a haircut. And without thought or provocation or anything, my gut twisted. And the narrative that came up was, what side of town are you going to? Who's going with you? Who's cutting your hair? And so this sense of my son, who is a very large, I'm going to say he's attractive because he is, young Black man moving through this society, lives in my body, that even after all of that healing and time to rest, I still didn't feel safe with him moving in the world just to go get his haircut. Now, I mean, I was okay with my daughter jumping on the highway alone, driving to New York. But when my son said he was going to the barber, and there was no thought in that. My body reacted, my stomach twisted in a knot, and my mind began to race of, how can I keep you safe in this world? Like, where are you going? What side of town are you going on? Is someone going to go with you to the barber? And then I was able to rebound from that and, center myself just because of the practices. But it just let me know that it just lives in your body, right?
Mm-hmm. And cellular memory too, right? There's all those imprints that are on cellular memory that can come up, through the generations.
So my son doesn't really like to talk about how it impacted me in such a negative way, because he's just, it makes him feel bad. And then also it kicks up his activation as well. So we really, I did get a chance to tell him about it, and we agreed and we talked about, that it was good that I was able to heal. And, but he didn't really talk much about how all of that impacted him, but I know it did.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So what do you find now in your sacred healing spaces? How do you hold space for women of color in that?
Oh, yeah. So one of the things when I first launched my business, the very first thing that I did was created a listening space, a listening community, much like the one that I went to. And it's called the Conversation Lounge. It's a free offering for women of color. We meet every third Thursday virtually. And so people can Zoom in from wherever, women of color can Zoom in from wherever. And basically we practice holding space for one another. And okay, first of all, let's talk about the way women of color show up in the world. There's this conditioning that we have to be these super women and hold all of this, everything for everyone all the time. And so, women have that role too, but there's an intersection for women of color, and then a higher expectation that we are not only to hold up everyone in our lives, but also everyone in our family and in our friends, but also when we show up at work, that sometimes we're often expected to be caregivers for the people around us, right? So it's a societal expectation that we can do all of these things and not have our own feelings or emotions, or even have the right to have mental health, depression. We're not supposed to have those things. And so there's these expectations. So for women of color to come and drop down all of that guard and sit across from another woman and talk from the heart, it's already hard, because most women of color don't think they need that space, right? Because they're superwoman. They got it all together. And so just opening this container and having this space, it's been a beautiful, very spiritual, very healing space for the women who show up. So we usually have anywhere from 6. On my 1-year anniversary, which was in January, we had 30 women show up. So we come in, we have a topic. Last month, we talked about giving ourselves permission for whatever that unspoken thing is. For me, it's permission to travel. And so we talk about that, and then we go off into what I call private lounges. We don't call them breakout rooms, we call them private lounges.
Oh, I love that.
In twos. And then you just practice deep listening back and forth around a prompt. We come back, we process that a little bit, and then we go in for a round two on another prompt, and women are connecting and laughing, and it's just been an incredible place. Some of the other things I offer are coaching around somatic stress release, and also I do Thomas Hanna somatics. So, but there's a twist on that as well, because I kind of want to make it a little soulful. Because to me, Thomas Hanna is like really clinical and really structured. And when I was first introduced to it in a storytelling program, it was prescriptive. We were supposed to do it once a day, but I found that it was so incredible. I enjoyed it so much. It became a very intimate practice that I started doing it twice a day, once prescriptively, like it was like we were given it. But at nighttime, it was just more of this intimate kind of connection to my own body. And so It was just kind of a flow. And so again, it's something that I wanted to bring back and introduce to women of color.
And I love that how you've created the space that really nurtures the shift from connecting role to role to soul to soul. You know, to really be able to connect from the heart and to really drop down into that, and then outwards to, you know, the women that are there with you or the women across from you. And just really listening and holding space for each other like that. It's such a loving embrace, you know. I can just feel the energy of that, about how nourishing and nurturing that can be for someone, and ultimately make us more productive, right? In a different way. It's how we feel and how we show up and how we approach life. And I love how you're really cultivating the approach of being very gentle and compassionate and with loving kindness, and really valuing rest.
Yep.
And particularly for women of color. So thank you so much for the work that you do. And I just want to open it up to our audience, a way of being able to get in touch with you, of how maybe, especially, women of color can connect into this conversation lounge and be a part of that. How can they do that?
So there are a couple of ways that folks can get connected with me. You can find me on Facebook with my business page, which is Sacred Healing Spaces. My website is www.sacredhealingspaces, you have to have the S on it, .com. And then you can also just email me at Tecca Thompson, tecca.thompson@gmail.com. And you can connect. And also the Conversation Lounge is also searchable on Eventbrite. You can also find it on Eventbrite as a reoccurring event. It's always up there if you would like to check out the Conversation Lounge. And just as we wrap up here, I wanted to say that I'm actually going to be taking a rest from the Conversation Lounge in the month of March, because I need a vacation. And we had talked about giving ourselves permission. And one of the things I needed to do was give myself permission to travel. So I'm going to be taking a vacation, resting at the beach. So
yay! Congratulations.
Join us in April if you would like to connect with us in April. So thank you.
Okay, that is awesome. And I'll have all the links down below in the description so that it's easy to connect. Tecca, it was such a wonderful opportunity to be able to listen, for you to share your story and your inspiration and motivation for anyone to rest, and particularly for women of color. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wonder if there's anything else that you'd like to share, any final words or messages of wisdom that you'd like to put out.
I think what I want to end on today, typically I just would end with a restful practice, but today I'm just going to end with that. When we say rest, it doesn't always mean you have to go and take a nap. A restful moment would be perhaps just taking a minute to push back from your computer or whatever you're doing and maybe daydream and look out the window, or just connect to your breath for a second, or just sitting quietly and listening to what your body has to say. So there's a way to find moments of rest, because I was really talking a lot about sleep, rest and sleep. And they're really two different things. And so you can always find a quick moment of rest in your busy day. And it's best to actually have lots of those moments in your day, right? And so that's what I wanted to leave with, is that find really quick creative ways, or to rest throughout your day.
That is really beautiful. And it actually reminds me too of a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, the late Thich Nhat Hanh now, that make each moment an occasion to live deeply, happily, in peace. Thank you all so much for listening, for watching today on Wise Woman Wednesdays. Thank you, Tecca Thompson. I am so grateful for you and all the work you do in encouraging us all to rest. Bye, everybody.